It has to announce that there is no gloomy, impenetrable abyss beyond the grave, but instead of that, a world of life and light, which may be known to us as clearly and fully and accurately as this physical world in which we live now. We have created the gloom and the horror for ourselves, like children who frighten themselves with ghastly stories, and we have only to study the facts of the case, and all these artificial clouds will roll away at once. We have an evil heredity behind us in this matter, for we have inherited all kinds of funereal horrors from our forefathers, and so we are used to them, and we do not see the absurdity and the monstrosity of them. The ancients were in this respect wiser than we, for they did not associate all this phantasmagoria of gloom with the death of the body, partly perhaps because they had a much more rational method of disposing of the body, a method which was not only infinitely better for the dead man, and more healthy for the living, but was also free from the gruesome suggestions connected with slow decay. They knew much more about death in those days, and because they knew more, they mourned less. On meeting a friend. Figure 35 gives us an example of a good, clearly defined and expressive thought form, with each color well marked off from the others. It represents the feeling of a man upon meeting a friend from whom he has been long separated. The convex surface of the crescent is nearest to the thinker, and its two arms stretch out towards the approaching friend as if to embrace him. The rose color naturally betokens the affection felt. The light green shows the depth of the sympathy which exists, and the clear yellow is a sign of the intellectual pleasure with which the creator of the thought anticipates the revival of delightful reminiscences of days long gone by. The appreciation of a picture. In figure 36, we have a somewhat complex thought form representing the delighted appreciation of a beautiful picture upon a religious subject. The strong, pure yellow marks the beholder's enthusiastic recognition of the technical skill of the artist, while all the other colors are expressions of the various emotions evoked within him by the examination of so glorious a work of art. Green shows his sympathy with the central figure in the picture. Deep devotion appears not only in the broad band of blue, but also in the outline of the entire figure, while the violet tells us that the picture has raised the man's thought to the contemplation of a lofty ideal, and has made him, at least for the time, capable of responding to it. We have here the first specimen of an interesting class of thought forms of which we shall find abundant examples later, that in which light of one color shines out through a network of lines of some quite different hue. It will be noted that in this case, from the mass of violet, there rise many wavy lines which flow like rivulets over a golden plain, and this makes it clear that the loftiest aspiration is by no means vague, but is thoroughly supported by an intellectual grasp of the situation and a clear comprehension of the method by which it can put into effect. Forms seen in those meditating. Sympathy and love for all. Hitherto we have been dealing chiefly with forms which are the expression of emotion, or of such thought as is aroused within the mind by external circumstances. We have now to consider some of those caused by thoughts which arise from within, forms generated during meditation, each being the effect produced by a conscious effort on the part of the thinker to form a certain conception, or to put himself into a certain attitude. Naturally, such thoughts are definite, for the man who trains himself in this way learns how to think with clearness and precision. And the development of his power in this direction shows itself in the beauty and regularity of the shapes produced. In this case, we have the result of an endeavor on the part of the thinker to put himself into an attitude of sympathy and love towards all mankind. And thus we have a series of graceful lines of the luminous green of sympathy, with the strong roseate glow of affection shining out between them. The lines are still sufficiently broad and wide apart to be easily drawn, but in some of the higher examples of thought forms of this type, the lines are so fine and so close that no human hand can represent them as they really are. The outline of this thought form is that of a leaf, yet its shape and the curve of its lines are more suggestive of a certain kind of shell, so that this is another example of the approximation to forms seen in physical nature, which we noted in commenting upon figure 16. An aspiration to enfold all. In figure 38, we have a far more developed example of the same type. This form was generated by one who was trying, while sitting in meditation, to fill his mind with an aspiration to enfold all mankind, in order to draw them upward towards the high ideal which shone so clearly before his eyes. Therefore it is that the form which he produces seems to rush out from him, to curve round upon itself, and to return to its base. Therefore it is that the marvelously fine lines are drawn in lovely, luminous violet, and that from within the form there shines out a glorious golden light, which it is unfortunately quite impossible to reproduce. For the truth is that all these apparently intricate lines are in reality only one line circling round the form again and again, with unwearied patience and wonderful accuracy. It is scarcely possible that any human hand could make such a drawing as this on this scale, and in any case the effect of its colors should not be shown, for it will be seen by experiment that if an attempt be made to draw fine violet lines close together upon a yellow background, a gray effect at once appears, and all likeness to the original is destroyed. But what cannot be done by hand may sometimes be achieved by the superior accuracy and delicacy of a machine. And it is in this way that the drawing was made from which our illustration is reproduced, with some attempt to represent the color effect as well as the wonderful delicacy of the lines and curves. In the 6 directions, the form represented in figure 39 is the result of another endeavor to extend love and sympathy in all directions, an effort almost precisely similar to that which gave birth to figure 37, though the effect seems so different. The reasons for this variety and for the curious shape taken in this case constitute a very interesting illustration of the way in which thought forms grow. It will be seen that in this instance, the thinker displays considerable devotional feeling, and has also made an intellectual effort to grasp the conditions necessary for the realization of his wishes, and the blue and yellow colors remain as evidence of this. Originally, this thought form was circular, and the dominant idea, evidently, was that the green of sympathy should be upon the outside, facing in all directions, as it were, and that love should lie at the center and heart of the thought and direct its outgoing energies. But the maker of this thought form had been reading Hindu books, and his mode of thought had been greatly influenced by them. Students of Oriental literature will be aware that the Hindu speaks not of 4 directions, as we do, but always of 6, since he very sensibly includes the zenith and the nadir. Our friend was imbued from his reading with the idea that he should pour forth his love and sympathy in the 6 directions. But since he did not accurately understand what the 6 directions are, he directed his stream of affection towards 6 equidistant points in his circle. The outrushing streams altered the shape of the outlying lines, which he had already built up, and so instead of having a circle as a section of his thought form, we have this curious hexagon with its inward curving sides. We see thus how faithfully every thought form records the exact process of its upbuilding, registering ineffaceably even the errors of its construction. An intellectual conception of cosmic order. In Figure 40, we have the effect of an attempt to attain an intellectual conception of cosmic order. The thinker was obviously a theosophist, and it will be seen that when he endeavors to think of the action of spirit upon matter, he instinctively follows the same line of symbolism as that depicted in the well-known seal of the society. Here we have an upward pointing triangle, signifying the threefold aspect of the spirit, interlaced with the downward pointing triangle, which indicates matter with its 3 inherent qualities. Usually we represent the upward triangle in white or gold, and the downward pointing one in some darker hue, such as blue or black. But it is noteworthy that in this case, the thinker is so entirely occupied with the intellectual endeavor that no color but yellow is exhibited within the form. There is no room as yet for emotions of devotion, of wonder, or of admiration. The idea which he wishes to realize fills his mind entirely, to the exclusion of all else. Still, the definiteness of the outline as it stands out against its background of rays shows that he has achieved a high measure of success. The Logos as manifested in man. We are now coming to a series of thoughts which are among the very highest the human mind can form, when in meditation upon the divine source of its being. When the man in reverent contemplation tries to raise his thought towards the Logos of our solar system, he naturally makes no attempt to image to himself that august being, nor does he think of him as in any way possessing such form as we can comprehend. Nevertheless, such thoughts build forms for themselves in the matter of the mental plane, and it will be of interest to us to examine those forms. In our illustration in Figure 41, we have a thought of the Logos as manifested in man, with the devotional aspiration that he may be manifested through the thinker. It is this devotional feeling which gives the pale blue tinge to the 5-pointed star, and its shape is significant since it has been employed for many ages as a symbol of God manifest in man. The thinker may perhaps have been a Freemason, and his knowledge of the symbolism employed by that body may have had its share in the shaping of the star. It will be seen that the star is surrounded by bright yellow rays shining out amidst a cloud of glory, which denotes not only the reverential understanding of the surpassing glory of the deity, but also a distinct intellectual effort in addition to the outpouring of devotion. Logos pervading all. Our next three figures are devoted to the effort to represent a thought of a very high type, an endeavor to think of the Logos as pervading all nature. Here again, in figure 38, it is impossible to give a full reproduction, and we must call upon our readers for an effort of the imagination which shall to some extent supplement the deficiencies of the arts of drawing and printing. The golden ball depicted in figure 42 must be thought of as inside the other ball of delicate lines, blue in color, which is drawn in figure 44. Any effort to place the colors in such intimate juxtaposition on the physical plane results simply in producing a green blur, so that the whole character of the thought form is lost. It is only by means of the machine before mentioned that it is all possible to represent the grace and the delicacy of the lines. As before, a single line produces all the wonderful tracery of figure 44, and the effect of the four radiating lines, making a sort of cross of light, is merely due to the fact that the curves are not really concentric, although at first sight they appear to be so. Another conception. Figure 45 exhibits the form produced by another person when trying to hold exactly the same thought. Here we have also an amazing complexity of almost inconceivably delicate blue lines, and here also our imagination must be called upon to insert the golden globe from figure 42 so that its glory may shine through every point. Here also, as in figure 44, we have that curious and beautiful pattern, resembling somewhat the damascening on ancient oriental swords, or that which is seen upon watered silk, or more antique. When this form is drawn by the pendulum, the pattern is not in any way intentionally produced, but simply comes as a consequence of the crossing of the innumerable, microscopically fine lines. It is evident that the thinker who created the form upon figure 44 must have held in his mind most prominently the unity of the Logos when he generated the form in figure 45. It has as clearly in mind the subordinate centers through which the divine life pours through, and many of these subordinate centers have accordingly represented themselves in the thought form. The threefold manifestation. When the form employed in figure 46 was made, its creator was endeavoring to think of the Logos in his threefold manifestation. The vacant space in the center of the form was a blinding glow of yellow light, and this clearly typified the first aspect, while the second was symbolized by the broad ring of closely knitted and almost bewildering lines, which surround this center, while the third aspect is suggested by the narrow outer ring, which seems more loosely woven. The whole figure is pervaded by the usual golden light, gleaming out between the lines of violet. The sevenfold manifestation. In all religions, there remains some tradition of the great truth that the Logos manifests himself through 7 mighty channels, often regarded as minor logoi, or great planetary spirits. In the Christian scheme, they appear as the 7 great archangels, sometimes called the 7 spirits before the throne of God. The figure numbered 47 shows the result of the effort to meditate upon this method of divine manifestation. We have the golden glow in the center, and also, though with lesser splendor, pervading the form. The line is blue, and it draws a succession of 7 graceful and almost feather-like double wings which surround the central glory and are clearly intended as a part of it. As the thought strengthens and expands, these beautiful wings change their color to violet and become like the petals of a flower, and overlap one another in an intricate but exceedingly effective pattern. This gives us a very interesting glimpse into the formation and growth of these shapes in higher matter. Intellectual aspiration. The form depicted in figure 43 bears a certain resemblance to that in figure 15. But beautiful as that was, this is, in reality, a far higher and grander thought, and implies much more advanced development on the part of the thinker. Here we have a great clear-cut spear or pencil of the pure, pale violet, which indicates a devotion to the highest ideal, and it is outlined and strengthened by an exceedingly fine manifestation of the noblest development of intellect. He who can think thus must already have entered upon the path of holiness, for he has learnt how to use the power of thought to very mighty effect. It will be noted that in both the colors there is a strong admixture of the white light, which is always indicative of unusual spiritual power. Surely the study of these thought forms should be a most impressive object lesson, since from it we may see both what to avoid and what to cultivate, and may learn by degrees to appreciate how tremendous is our responsibility for the exercise of this mighty power. Indeed, it is terribly true, as we said in the beginning, that thoughts are things, and puissant things, and it behooves us to remember that every one of us is generating them unceasingly night and day. See how great is the happiness this knowledge brings us to, and how gloriously we can utilize it when we know of someone in sorrow or in suffering. Often circumstances arise which prevent us from giving physical help, either by word or deed, however much we may desire to do so. But there is no case in which help by thought cannot be given, and no case in which it can fail to produce a definite result. It may often happen that at the moment our friend may be too entirely occupied with his own suffering, or perhaps too much excited to receive and accept any suggestion from without. But presently a time comes when our thought form can penetrate and discharge itself, and then assuredly our sympathy will produce its due result. It is indeed true that the responsibility of using such power is great, yet we should not shrink from our duty on that account. It is sadly true that there are many men who are unconsciously using their thought power chiefly for evil, yet this only makes it all the more necessary for those of us who are beginning to understand life a little should use it consciously and use it for good. We have at our command a never-failing criterion. We can never misuse this mighty power of thought if we employ it always in unison with the great divine scheme of evolution and for the uplifting of our fellow man. Helpful thoughts. The figures numbered 48 to 54 were the results of a systematic attempt to send helpful thought by the friend who has furnished us with the sketches. A definite time was given each day at a fixed hour. The forms were in some cases seen by the transmitter, but in all cases were perceived by the recipient, who immediately sent rough sketches of what was seen by the next post to the transmitter, who has kindly supplied the following notes with regard to them. In the colored drawings appended, the blue features appear to have represented the more devotional element of the thought. The yellow forms accompanied the endeavor to communicate intellectual fortitude or mental strength and courage. The rosy pink appeared when the thought was blended with affectionate sympathy. If the sender A could formulate his thought deliberately at the appointed time, the receiver B would report seeing a large clear form, as in the figures 48, 49, and 54. The latter persisted for some minutes, constantly streaming its luminous yellow message upon B. If, however, A was of necessity experimenting under difficulty, say walking out of doors, he would occasionally see his forms broken up into smaller globes, or shapes, such as 50, 51, 52, and B, would report their receipt so broken up. In this way, many details could be checked and compared as from opposite ends of the line, and the nature of the influence communicated offered another means of verification. Upon one occasion A was disturbed in his endeavor to send thought of the blue-pink connotation by a feeling of anxiety that the nature of the pink element should not be misapprehended. The report of B was that a well-defined globe, as in figure 54, was first seen, that this suddenly disappeared, being replaced by a moving procession of little light green triangles, as in figure 53. These few drawings give but a slight idea of the varied flower-like and geometric forms seen, while neither paint nor crayon work seems capable of representing the glowing beauty of their living colors. Before closing this little treatise, it will perhaps be of interest to our readers to give a few examples of another type of forms unknown to those who are confined to the physical senses as their means of obtaining information. Many people are aware that sound is always associated with color, that when, for example, a musical note is sounded, a flash of color corresponding to it may be seen by those whose finer senses are already to some extent developed. It seems not to be so generally known that sound produces form as well as color, and that every piece of music leaves behind it an impression of this nature, which persists for some considerable time, and is clearly visible and intelligible to those who have eyes to see. Such a shape is perhaps not technically a thought form, unless indeed we take it, as we may well, as the result of the thought of the composer expressed by means of the skill of the musician through his instrument. Some such forms are very striking and impressive, and naturally their variety is infinite. Each class of music has its own type of form, and the style of the composer shows as clearly in the form which his music builds as a man's character shows in his handwriting. Other possibilities of variation are introduced by the kinds of instruments upon which the music is performed, and also by the merits of the player. The same piece of music, if accurately played, will always build the same form, but that form will be enormously larger when it is played upon a church organ or by a military band than when it is performed upon a piano. And not only the size, but also the texture of the resultant form will be very different. There will also be a similar difference in texture between the result of a piece of music played upon a violin and the same piece executed upon the flute.